Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Life Talks. Today I have my father on for the second time, and we're going to start it off with going into relationships. You have the floor, Dad.
Hey, Michael, great to be on again. Talk about some interesting stuff that hopefully will help uh, us and other people, anybody that tunes in. And the topic is, I think, a very popular topic because it talks about the importance of relating, trying to avoid conflict, and that's hard to do, but dealing with conflict, I guess, is a better way of saying it. And it touches upon some essential ingredients to make a relationship work. I guess one of the things that comes to mind is if you're going to have a good relationship, whether it's with your girlfriend, your spouse, a friend, whether you're trying to relate at work with an employee, with your boss, there are certain elements that are so important to keep in mind to, to accomplish what your goal might be, whatever the relationship um, situation is about. So one of the first things that I guess we really need to understand is the importance of independence, being independent. Um, Ralph Emerson is one of my favorite philosophers. He talks about the importance of independence and the importance of taking responsibility for yourself, for your life, and being your own person, making your own decisions, and not following the crowd, um, but following what is your truth. But yeah, being independent is essential. So Stephen Covey's Seven Habits talks about this as kind of one of the building blocks. In the Seven Habits is, and that is, we start out, we're born, we're totally dependent on our mother. Then hopefully, if we are parented properly, if we're raised properly, we are taught to be independent, and that is the ability to literally stand on our own 2 feet in the beginning, um, and then be able to uh, walk, crawl, run, so to speak. Um, so developing that sense of independent so that you are able to um, not worry about what the other person thinks or says, not worry about being accepted or rejected, but having a life that is fulfilling for your own person, for your own sense of self-esteem, for not um, living a life that is fearful of losing. So that being said, if one is not able to develop an independent framework, it's almost impossible to have a healthy relationship with somebody else. So what we strive for is for that person, once that person becomes independent, is to then learn to become interdependent.
Mm.
All right. So that ability to be interdependent then allows you to have an adult, mature relationship with another person. It allows you to uh, work things out when there is a situation that presents a conflict. Um, it allows you to communicate for win-win solutions, right? As opposed to win-lose,
Yeah.
lose-win, and so forth, right?
Yeah.
We want to make sure that the outcome is agreeable to both. That requires a mature attitude, mindset. So, and that leads into the importance of communication skills. from my own experience, I can't tell you how important it is to communicate effectively. How much money at the corporate side, when I was in corporate and working in, in the business world, how communication was not done properly, and it wound up costing the company so much money because things were not done right the first time, and people assumed that they heard one thing when they heard something else. And so what happens is if you don't do things right the first time because you don't communicate whatever you want to communicate properly, then you've got to do it over and over and over, and it's such a waste. In fact, I'm under the impression that it's probably the fact that miscommunication probably represents the largest expense item on an income statement. Now, you won't see that anywhere. You won't see on an income statement a line item that says miscommunication XX dollars. But they say that roughly it's like 25–30% of the total income for an organization. That's big bucks. Wow. So doing things right the first time requires good communication skills. Now, we can have the whole session talk about communication skills, but I just want to zero in on one very important aspect of it, and that is listening skills. The importance of listening. Listening to another human being is probably the greatest gift you can give that other person. There's not many people that are going to truly listen empathically, put themselves in your shoes so they can really get what you're trying to say, and not preparing to what they're going to say next, but they're truly listening. They really want to get where you're coming from. It's not easy and very rare, but it's the key to effective relationship skills. I don't care, again, if it's even if it's listening, trying to listen to your girlfriend, your boyfriend, an employee of yours. You just sit back, try to listen to what the other person is trying to say and communicate. And not only verbally, but behaviorally, body language. In fact, body language takes up more of the communication than the verbal. So listening skills, and again, we could talk a lot about that. I don't want to take up the whole session on that, but one great way to listen effectively is to, when the person's speaking to you, sit back. Eye contact is so important, and paraphrase. Because many times a person says something to you, and you may receive it in a different way than the person is really trying to communicate. And so then there's this distortion. So how do you know if the other person is getting what you're trying to say? Well, the best way would be to, after the person finishes a thought, is to paraphrase what he or she said. So you basically say something like, so in other words, what I hear you say is, fill in the blanks. And the other person then can say, no, that's not quite what I'm trying to say. Okay, clarify. There's clarification, and then there's finally acceptance, and then there's a connect. Easier said than done, man. Easier said than done. Again, because it's human nature to wanna be center stage. Get finish what you got to say, because I got a lot to tell you about this stuff. You got to listen to me now. I gave you some. Now listen to me. No, put yourself aside and give the other person a chance to be center stage. And let me tell you, that's a home run. Okay. The other thing is, we talk a lot about what's going on in the world. It's not a conflict. How do we get around this conflict? How can we in our sphere of influence, Michael, you and I talked a lot about the sphere of influence. How can we, in our sphere of influence,
yeah, we have a good 400, 500 hours in of phone calls talking about what the hell are we supposed to do in this world to fix it. So,
yeah,
and we don't, and then we get off the phone and then we say, okay, well, what are you going to do? And then don't do anything because it's, it's definitely a struggle. Communication for sure. Because many people have the know-it-all feeling, guilty. I've had that, most of my life. So I definitely have spoken more than I've listened.
Yeah, we all have.
But yeah.
So, and when it's interesting too to note that when you're communicating with somebody else, like think about who's responsible for the transaction, if you will. So I'm speaking to you, right? And you're listening, let's say. Whose responsibility is it that you got what I'm trying to tell you, would you think?
Both.
Both, exactly right, both. So and so you kind of check each other, and then it kind of is the glue that puts it together and keeps it there. The other thing that's important too is this idea of conflict resolution. How can we take these communication skills and help us to deal with conflicting situations? And again, the listening skills come into place so much. Just the having the courtesy to listen to somebody during a heightened emotional situation really diffuses the whole transaction. You put the other person at ease when you say, okay, I get it. I understand what you're trying. So what you're trying to say is fill in the blanks. Okay, got it. Wow, that just diffuses everything. And now that puts it to a different level where you can at least talk to each other. So you can see where each other is coming from. And then that basically becomes the groundwork for resolving whatever it is that is the source of conflict. And then I think also, just keeping in mind the ability to, when you're interacting with another person, is to interact in such a way that you're basically being assertive as opposed to being angry, being aggressive. Being passive aggressive, which is probably more aggressive than normal aggression.
Yes.
Speaking what you need to say on whatever it is, making your request, and in a way where you're taking responsibility for the situation, not blaming the other person. But basically asserting your stand. Something bothers you, let's say, and you need to speak about it. You put it into this formula, which I kind of worked on, is to identify the fact of the event, whatever it is that's bothering you, you need to express, and then how that situation makes you feel, and then putting it in the form of request.
Yeah, I have written down here a 3-step process because I wanted to talk about that. It's funny you're bringing that up now, and I can share my story.
Yeah, I mean,
how
for
I use
example, I mean, let's take an example. I think examples are kind of clarify things. What I'm trying to say is, let's say your girlfriend or your boyfriend has a tendency to put dishes, or simple things, dirty dishes in the sink. Instead of cleaning it up, putting it in the dishwasher, they just throw stuff in the sink. Well, that's very annoying to you, right? So is it right? Is it wrong? Who's to say, right? It could be perfectly okay to just leave dirty dishes, right? It depends on what's important and what's not, or how you.
Yeah, some people are organized in the chaos.
Yeah. But let's say that bothers you though. Bothers you what the other, okay, so again, you take it on, you take it as your responsibility to communicate to the other person that this is bothering you, it's an issue for you. So the first thing you do is, again, you identify the fact. Sweetheart, you have a tendency to leave dishes in the sink, dirty dishes in the sink. And I want you to know this upsets me. You know, it aggravates me. It's like, it seems to me that you really don't care about my feelings and I get angry, you know. And so what I'm asking is if you would, after you finish your meal, is simply rinse it and put it in the dishwasher. Put the dishes in the dishwasher. That's it. All right. I identified the fact that the person is putting dirty dishes in the sink. You express your feelings and you made a request. There's no blaming. There's no judging, right? There's no, oh, yeah, what are you? You're such a slob. You leave the dishes in the sink. Can you imagine? That's not going to take you anywhere. That's only going to bring up defenses and wind up in a big argument for what? Dirty dishes? So I think that's so important. And what happens if you don't assert yourself? What happens if you just, oh, it's a minor thing. Don't bring it up. Well, you repress these feelings, one incident, another incident, and all of a sudden, these repressed feelings have to have an outlet, and it winds up in an explosion or some incident or event that really is not good for anybody. So that's a neat little formula to keep in mind. But staying assertive, so important.
Yeah, facts, feelings, request. And
Yeah, that's simple.
I want to share because I actually use that because I remember you were telling me about that in a previous job that I had, which I ended up leaving because I really wasn't happy there anyway. But I had a boss, and I'd say he was a leader, really. I mean, he was a leader because he really busted his ass. He was definitely, out of all the bosses, leaders I had in my life, he was actually really a leader. But there was one problem I had with him is that when he would come to these job sites, he would be very dismissive and he'd be very like bully like. And I remember I was installing vinyl, which for people who don't know, it's like it's basically all the advertising on buses, or when you go to a mall, it's the stickers that are on windows, big, you might not even notice them. Also vehicle wraps, and I think what we were doing here is vehicle wraps. They were promoting Grey Goose and different vodkas on these vehicles down the shore. And he was coming up from a job from New York, so he came from New York down to South Jersey. And he came in and he goes, we were all working, and he would come up to me. He goes, "Hey, you're doing it all wrong. You got to do it like this." This is how he's talking. And then he says to me, "You know what?" Uh, he kept saying things that were like very intimidating, bullying. The average. It's the boss. So I said to him, I said, "You know what? I'd like to talk with you outside." He said, "No, you don't." Instantly. Now I go right back in. I wasn't expecting that answer, right? So I'm like, how to, I said, okay, just give it a second, give it a second. Then he came back and we stepped out, and then he came back in the room, and then he had said something else. He says, "Hey, what are you, stupid?" And I said, "We need to go outside and talk right now." So now he goes, "You don't want to do this," right? And my heart's like, oh, we don't want conflict. So we go outside, and he's like, his body language. He goes, "All right, what do you got to say?" And this is, here I am. So I use that 3-step process. And the fact was, I said, listen, and I started it by saying, first of all, I appreciate you coming down here to help us, learn this, help us with this job. And I said, the past few times that I've been around you, I said, you've said this, fact, right? He did say those things. So I wasn't something that could be argued. And I said, it makes me feel like I'm being bullied. So I said to him, I appreciate it if when you're talking to me, you give me the same respect that I give you. And I could barely get those words out. I mean, my heart was going, not someone who likes conflict, but he didn't know what to say. I felt like in that moment, because I think like many people, it's very hard to get to that assertive standpoint without getting pulled into your emotions and just running away, or to be aggressive, which isn't the way either. Passive aggressive, while worse than being aggressive, uh, aggression is still not the answer. You're still going to get, not the best feedback. And he ended up buying me lunch that day, and and he ended up complimenting me to I had two bosses at the time. And I learned from that experience from you that, really the benefit of really standing up for yourself in those situations. And that, as you said earlier too, communication is two ways, right? If he continued to speak that way to me, in his mind, that may have not, that's, he's just being, tough love, right? So that's just how he speaks. And to some extent, it's like, there's guy talk, right? I'm not going to take everything to heart, and everything isn't all about me sensitive. But if it's a constant thing and it bothers me, I can speak up about it without going to a whole drama special. And yeah, so absolutely. And that was very effective. Bought me lunch and received compliments from that point forward, because I'm standing up for myself. And by making the request too, when you say that, when you make the request to people, it's not many people are going to take your request and say, shove it up your ass. They're not going to take your request, and that's okay. And then that point, moving down the line, if you go through that process and you make the request, sometimes it's important to step away from those relationships as well. So, because people who, if you really follow that method, you're requesting people, and people who don't respect your request, you got to choose your battles of whether you want to continue a relationship with these people.
Yeah, so that's right. They have, that's a good point. You have the right to make the request, and they have the right to refuse it. So, I mean, that's, that has to be a given. So, that's so important. And what's important here is that you're taking responsibility for this situation, right? This is about you. This is not putting blame on the other person. The other person is not causing your problem. You have a problem. This is a problem that is your problem. You're owning the problem. In other words, you're not transferring this problem to somebody else, right? So that being said, the reason that this method works is that you will never, ever cause any injury to another person by being assertive. And at the same time, you are safeguarding your self-esteem. Inwardly, you're saying to yourself that you count, you are important, you have the right to stand up for yourself. And so that's a very good habit to get into. And again, very, very difficult. We sit here and we talk about this. In theory, that sounds wonderful, but try to put it into practice. And the reason it's so difficult for us is because people misconstrue this idea of assertiveness with aggression. So we're afraid to make the request because we're afraid that we're going to be construed as being aggressive, that we want to fight. That's not the case at all. But we're afraid that that's what the other person's going to perceive. So we are reluctant to bring it up. And in many cases, people will receive it as a step of aggression when it's really not. Because if you follow this the way we're suggesting, you're simply, in the end, making a request. You're not making a demand. Making
it definitely takes practice. I mean, the first time you do it, you might be like, you have to be in the arena to a certain extent. You have to embrace conflict, and that takes practice. And it only, the only way you do it is by doing it. There's no other way around it.
And the way that you realize that you're making progress with this is to recognize the times that you could have been assertive and you weren't. The fact that you at least recognize that you had a situation, you had an opportunity to speak up and you didn't. That's the first good step towards progress. And then it's like any other habit. It will grow. It'll get stronger the more you practice it. And every day, there's not a day that doesn't go by where you can't be assertive. Now, that's not to say that you're going to speak up all of the time. You have to, you know, you have to choose the situations that
Navigate.
make sense. Yeah, yeah. So another point I think that is worth mentioning is this idea of when something happens to us, an event, situations that might trigger. We all have things like that happen. Something that just triggers. I don't know what it is, or whether a person says or an expression that somebody makes. It just triggers something with us. It just gets us all riled up. The idea is to kind of put that feeling on pause and to try to be responsive as opposed to reacting. So
Yeah, real quick, you actually, that makes me think of something. Like when I actually recently was talking about like emotions. The way to look at emotions for me is to look at it like an indicator of your gas tank. Now, if you look at your gas tank and every time your gas, like if it's getting close to empty, going, oh, it's getting close to empty. That's not the way to look at it. It's like, okay, it's getting I have to go to the gas station, right? But that's how emotions are. So when the emotions come up, you go, okay, I'm feeling this emotion, I'm feeling this emotion. Okay, it's a gauge. And using that emotion to say to navigate and use your your logical brain to navigate your emotional, how you're going to respond to it. But getting mad at it's like if you just get mad at your gas tank being low, it's ridiculous. So in the same way, when you're feeling a certain feeling, it's an indicator and use that indicator. But it's been ingrained. The ego, I don't want bad feelings. And in doing so, as you've said a lot in this conversation, it leads to passive aggressiveness.
Yeah.
So fill your tank up. You have to respond to the indicators. They're indicators, right? You feel a certain way. It doesn't mean it's wrong, but if you're feeling a certain way all the time, it could be because you're passive aggressive and you need to speak up, or it could be because you're always aggressive, so you need to listen more. So, and only you can navigate that.
Yeah, this idea of emotions, trying to manage the emotions. That's not to say to stop the emotion. The emotions are part of who we are, and they're good. They're good indicators as to things are not going right in our in our in our body, in our system. But if you take a look at like a seesaw, a seesaw is it's horizontal, and if two people are on it, let's say on equal weight, it's balanced, right? And so if you say on the, let's say the left side of the seesaw would be intelligence, let's say, and on the right side would be um, emotions. If your emotions are high in situations, if your emotions get heightened, your intelligence is where? It's down at the bottom. So that's not a good time to be talking about a situation with somebody, let's say, that's bothering you. It's best to let things simmer down so that your intelligence is more of an equal stride with the emotions, and then you can have a more effective communication with whoever you're having this relationship with.
That's the gospel. That keeps coming up in my life. It's when they read from the gospel, you press your head, you press your mouth, and you press your heart. So when that seesaw is intelligence and emotions, if you're too much up here, you're spitting out bullshit. If you're too much here, you're going to be spitting out bullshit, and they're indicators. So the thinking mind has to be connected with the heart mind, and then we're in that flow state. We it's logic and emotion. Absolutely, it's well said. So, and I think that ties into masculinity and true femininity. I think at least that's how I see the world, and that's how I have to express it. You know, I see the feminine as emotional. I learned a lot from women in my life. Uh, they're very good at emotional intelligence. And it's not to say that women can't be good at intelligence. It's not it. I give the example. It's like me trying to give pregnancy advice. I wouldn't be good at giving pregnancy advice because I can't get pregnant. So in the same way, I'm not a woman. So that is and I think it's very powerful what you just said. That seesaw analogy is very good. So, and if you're too far intelligent, you really lack emotion. And if you're too emotional, you lack intelligence. You're not, we seek that balance in between.
Yeah. So again, trying not to be reactive. Again, this takes practice. Not dismissing the emotion. I can't emphasize that enough.
Yeah.
Not dismissing it, but recognizing that the emotion is just going to interfere with what we're trying to communicate here. So again, it's a matter of balance. Again, we talk about this. It seems we always come back to this idea of balance. It's so important, rather than to be on one side of the equation versus the other side. And again, it's this idea of not reacting but responding, and that you play on the words of responsibility, the ability to respond, not the ability to react, the ability to respond. So
yeah, then you're a victim to outside circumstances.
Yeah.
Anyone who thinks about you, now you are a slave to how people think about you. And rather than to respond, you listen to how people think about you. I think it'd be ignorant to just shut off anybody's criticism of you. But if you are a slave to how every bad thing that's said about you, you're not owning your own power. You're not going to be able to navigate or respond.
And just keeping in mind that when an event occurs, you have the choice of either reacting or responding. So event happens, something triggers, somebody says something to you that angers you. You just put it on pause here. You said the event happened, put it on pause and wait, okay, person just said something, did something. How am I going to respond to that? See, that's being responsible. And you have the time. Now you may not want to get back to that person on this thing till in an hour, or maybe you want to wait until the next day until you have time to think about it.
Yeah, and going back to your original thing, the three-step process, right? I mean, the first thing is fact, right? Fact is logical. This actually happened. You're thinking about it. How you feel is not wrong.
Right.
You're feeling, and then articulation with both of those is what will be the most highly effective.
Yeah, interesting, right? Fact, the mind. Interesting you just did that too. The fact is the mind, the feeling is the heart, and the request is the neutral.
That's the request. And that's the thing. We're missing it. Well, like, and you spoke about communication and language, and 25 to 30% of I think you were saying business, the profit
25%.
That and miscommunication is, to me, I mean, this is like, we have to reconnect. Well, we don't have to do anything, but I think it would be helpful if we reconnect our words and our language to what religions really pointed to. And to me, miscommunication is another word for sin meaning ignorance. And when we are ignorant to our own power, our thinking mind in connection with our emotional mind, that's the power of the gospel to me. When you're in that flow state, you actually are a harmonious human being. And it doesn't mean you're bad if you think too much or you feel too much. Those are indicators. It's not looking from the eyes of judgment. It's an allowance that everyone's going to grow differently. What's better, the tall tree or the tree that's still a seed? It's a ridiculous question. It's nature they're different places, right? So the people who are completely ignorant, they're not ready to, like, that's just how it is. There's no you can't force people to grow. When people are ready to grow, they will.
And making a request, the more we practice this idea of being assertive, standing up for ourselves, the more we practice it, the better we become. And I think that what comes out of it too is that you'll find that most people are reasonable, and that when you make a request, they will definitely do what they can to fulfill that request. Oh, I didn't know the radio was keeping you up at night. Oh, absolutely, I will shut that down lower. I'm so sorry. I think is a typical response as to trying to fight about it. You know, so again, practice makes perfect.
Yeah, and you know what's a really good tool too? I remember, sometimes, I mean, this sounds like you've said earlier. It's like it's really sounds really good on paper, right? But then when you're really in those situations, it's like, your wife or your husband's yelling at you. Yeah, try the assertive approach then. Sometimes it's important. Right. Like it's like, that's why this word navigate keeps coming up, rather than to be on the left side or the right side, navigate. Sometimes you got to flow. Sometimes you have to be table flipping Jesus. And sometimes you got to be, hug Jesus, giving some hugs. Yeah. So, what I've noticed is if you're in the moment, like if you're highly emotional in the moment, just say, I got to get the fuck out of here right now. I'm not in a place where I can really speak right now. Right. Go for a walk,
right.
Like
diffuse it.
Because if you try to be that assertive in that moment, you're highly emotional. It's you got to listen to yourself. I got to go for a walk. I got to go for a drive, So
yeah,
especially when you're locked in your house for a year.
This talk a little bit about this idea of passive aggression. Passive aggression never works because, first of all, it's so hurtful, I guess, to the other person. It's so easy to kind of just shut the other person out, as opposed to talking about and being assertive and communicating to the other person what it is that's bothering you. It's just now that puts the other person in such an awkward place because they don't know what to think. They don't understand. They don't know what to make of the silence. How do you deal with the silence? Now you start wondering about what did I say? What did I do? It's again a very hurtful way of relating to another person. The other person needs the respect to know what's going on with you. They can't read your mind. You can't read their mind. That's why it's so important to talk about stuff, especially in a marriage where you've made a serious commitment to the other person. And so it's essential that both of you understand what's going on, and there shouldn't be any guessing games. So it's massive aggressive. It just we talked about how assertive always works because it doesn't cause injury to anybody. Passive aggressive always causes injury. In my opinion, passive aggressive is even worse than aggressive behavior.
Yeah. This actually makes me want to share a Gandhi quote. It's a little bit of a mouthful, but I think it's really powerful. And it ties into what you're saying about passive aggressive versus assertive. It's a little bit of a mouthful, but it's really good. He goes, my nonviolence does not admit of running away from danger and leaving dear ones unprotected. Between violence and cowardly flight, I can only prefer violence to cowardice. I can no more preach nonviolence to a coward than I can tempt a blind man to enjoy healthy scenes. Nonviolence is the summit of bravery, and in my own experience, I have had no difficulty in demonstrating to men trained in the school of violence the superiority of nonviolence. Yep. As a coward, which I was for years, I harbored violence, passive aggressive. I began to prize nonviolence only when I began to shed cowardice. A rabbit that runs away from a bull terrier is not particularly nonviolent. The poor thing trembles at the sight of the terrier and runs for very life. Nonviolence is not a cover for cowardice, but it is a supreme virtue of the brave. Exercise of nonviolence requires far greater bravery than that of swordsmanship. Cowardice is wholly inconsistent with nonviolence, and you replace nonviolence with being assertive. Translation from swordmanship, and you replace swordmanship with aggression, to nonviolence is possible, and at times even an easy stage. Nonviolence, therefore, presupposes the ability to strike. It is a conscious, deliberate restraint put upon one's desire for vengeance, but vengeance is any day superior to passive, effeminate, and helpless submission. Forgiveness is higher still. Vengeance, too, is weakness. The desire for vengeance or aggression comes out of a fear of harm, imaginary or real.
Yes,
A
yes.
dog barks and bites when he fears. A man who fears no one on earth would consider it too troublesome even to summon up anger against one who is vainly trying to injure him. The sun does
Yeah.
not wreak vengeance upon little children who throw dust at him. They only harm themselves in the act. And what's I like about that is how, on the, Pat, you're saying passive aggressive, and what he's speaking about is it's actually cowardice, because passive aggressive is I don't like conflict, and it builds up, and
Yeah.
when it does come out, it comes out in a toxic way.
Yes.
Now, aggression is at least better. What he's speaking about is a soldier who actually stands up for himself. Although it's not the best way, he has more respect for the soldier or the one who is the aggressor.
Yeah.
Almost like he has more respect for the bully in a certain light than the victim, but it's not the best. It's not, there's still a problem there. The best is the nonviolent, and the nonviolent man is one who is the assertive man. He's not afraid. He welcomes conflict. He doesn't seek conflict. And he actually says it's actually easier for a man who is aggressive to get to the point of nonviolence, true or assertiveness, than it is for someone who is passive aggressive. And the people who are passive aggressive in our society, they claim that they're being nice, right? Be a nice guy. That's bullshit. Don't be a nice guy. Be someone who is you're your own person, your own be whole rather than nice.
Yeah, and I really think it's a key to a good relationship, speaking up and being transparent and communicating what really is happening for you to the other person, and understanding that you the key here, I think, is that you cannot hurt the other person. There's no injury here by being assertive.
Mm.
If you can try to kind of digest that a little bit and understand it, then you might be more willing to be assertive in situations that come up for you. And a side benefit I think I mentioned before, worth mentioning again, is the benefit of a healthy self-esteem that is that you will gain by speaking up for yourself. Even if your request is declined, the fact that you stood for yourself, you can get back home, you can look yourself in the mirror and say, you know what, that was good. I stood up for myself. That felt good. I think the bottom line here is basically it boils down. This all boils down to one word, and that's taking responsibility. I love that word.
Yeah.
Responsibility for your life. Very simple, but it's so freeing. But responsibility equals freedom.
Yeah, Jocko. There's this guy I follow, Jocko Willink, and I'm sure a lot of people have heard of him. He actually, his book is called Discipline Equals Freedom.
Okay.
Same thing.
Yeah. And what better way to raise your children is to teach them to become responsible, independent adults that will enable them to interrelate with other human beings in an effective manner that is good for all.
And I think, what's interesting, to tie in another point that you said, to connect two of the points that you've said, is dependence and independence, and to strive for interdependence, and to tie it in with the passive aggressive. That would be
Right.
in a place of dependence. But generally, people who are in passive aggressive, they use other people's opinions.
Right.
They come in groups. It's like groupthink. Well, I'm a mob. We all agree on this. It's like that video I just saw you with Seinfeld. It's this, but they don't think for themselves. They just want to fit in. And
Right.
they express their opinion through groups. But if you singled out one of those people by themselves, they couldn't stand and shine on their own thoughts. So that's what leads to be an independent person. And I've experienced both of them. I've been someone who's been passive aggressive in my life, and I've also been independent. I don't need anybody. And in and of themselves, they're not enough. You need both of them, because in times of my life, we need each other, right? We need to be dependent on each. We have to be open to be dependent on each other. You know, when you're sick, you need help, right? When you are in a place where, you know, whatever, fill in the blank, that you need help from other people. I've experienced at a point in my life where I was independent. I don't need anybody. And I had a conversation yesterday with Erin, and she spoke about, you got to turn your receiver on too sometimes, because the ego can step in and say, I don't need anybody. I'll do this on my own. And that's, I felt that in my life, and I felt it. I felt both of them, and they're incomplete. The yin and the yang is very, very important, and interdependence is so powerful. And maybe you can comment on, you know, I think it was your professor who said it's two whole people to make a
Yeah,
good
yeah,
relationship.
yeah, yeah. Very interesting. If you have two people in a relationship, and let's say they're not whole, and we talked about being independent. Let's say being independent is whole. Um, so let's say that if a person is not whole, then they're, let's say, a half a person. A half a person that is in relationship with another half a person equals one whole person. Now, will that relationship work? Well, it may, since you both depend on each other in a sense, because you're not whole. So both of you are kind of dependent on each other, but you're not independent. The problem is that what happens if the one of the two people becomes whole? Will the person that's whole going to stand for a relationship with the other person that's a half? I don't think so. This happens a lot with the people, let's say, that are alcoholics and they're codependent, and maybe both of them are, and one of them gets help, goes to a 12-step program, and they get the help and they correct their lives, they become whole. They're not going to want to carry the other person, and so that invariably will wind up in a split. Whereas on the other side of the spectrum is the 1+1. You have one healthy person in a relationship with another healthy person, which equals two healthy people. Two healthy people who are independent and who are able to be interdependent. You can't have an interdependent relationship unless the two people are independent. You see, the reason being is that if you're an independent person in a relationship with another independent person, you know that you can stand on your own 2 feet. You don't need the other person. You choose to be with the other person for a myriad of reasons. So if you were to lose the relationship, it's not the end of the world. You can still stand on your own 2 feet, and you can move on with your life. So yeah, this idea of interdependence is key, but you have to follow the progression of dependency to independence to interdependence. It works, and if you're not independent, you really have to examine yourself. Many times, people go to couple therapy when they really should be going to individual therapy. They think that the answer is in the coupleness.
Yeah.
Many times the answer is trying to get yourself whole first so that you can have a healthy relationship.
Yeah. Then you can go to therapy when things are
Yeah,
good.
right.
But nobody talks about that, right? It's like, it's maintain it. That'd be fun. It's always to fix the problem. It's these two halves.
Yeah, so interesting talk. So yeah, responsibility is the key. So important. So I think that pretty much sums up the ideas that I wanted to pass on. And I hope that it's been helpful to you, your listeners. And if there are any comments or suggestions or whatever, I guess people can comment on your
100%.
On your podcast.
100%.
And, I think it's an interesting topic.
Yeah, I definitely, and you touched at the beginning too, listening. I think I did good listening on this video because Yeah, you know me, based on our conversations, I throw up all these ideas because, you know, I haven't found many people who would really enjoy these conversations as much as I
Yeah,
do.
and
And
also I
that's my
think,
fault, but
well, but the thing is though, there's another point that comes out to it, and I think about it, is this idea of the pause. Many times when we're speaking with somebody, and there seems to be like a pause in the conversation, maybe on the telephone, and then it goes silent for maybe a couple of seconds. Many people in our culture are very, very uncomfortable with silence. Um, so they got to fill in that space because they feel uncomfortable. They feel like they have to fill it in. And I grew up with both parents were like that, especially my
your
mom.
mother, yeah, I remember.
Wow, my mom.
Why
Well,
are
I
you
go
so
visit
quiet?
mom, and and we'd sit around the living room, and after a half hour of talking about things that were of interest, there wasn't much to talk about. And we would go quiet. And I basically have been introverted for the most of my life, and then comfortable being on the quiet side. And my mom would say, "What's the matter with you? Why are you so quiet?" I said, "Mom, I have nothing to say. But do you have a problem?" "No, no, I have no problem, but it's very quiet. You have to talk." I said, "I have to talk." I said, "Interesting." So anyhow, and my dad was also he was a very outgoing, extroverted type of person,
Mm.
and he'd be the life of the party. But he too would have difficulty with if it got quiet, very uncomfortable. It's interesting, and I think that's quite common in our culture, like I said.
Yeah, I've experienced when I was younger, growing up, I was very introverted. And then I went through a phase right when I hit the gym, got my muscles, got a lot of attention. I became very extroverted. And then when I started to gain the fruits of that, is not what I wanted. And then I went really deep into introversion, really deep. And now, as I'm seeing it, my whole view is I want to become an introverted extrovert. What I
Right.
mean by that is I put out a video about a tree recently, just going for a walk. And see, the tree, this is how I label success and versus a career, like a job versus a career. See, when you're a seed, right? When you're a seed, you're in the dirt. And you gotta have some friction in your life in order to grow. Otherwise, you're not going to grow. So that's when you're in the ground. You're tasting dirt. You're having experiences, and many people they start to have. So to me, it's like introverted people are the ones who were focused on the roots. They're really trying to understand the meaning and the grasp in there. And then extroverted are the people who are just about, the flashiness of the tree, right? Look, I'm a tree. I'm a tree. I'm flowering. Look at my flowers. But they lack the roots, right?
Mm.
They're just they don't. When you really poke deep enough, there's no foundation. So, but if you're just introvert, I only can talk about deep things. That's not it either. You want to be able to integrate both the roots and the fruit. Which is more important, the roots or the fruit? They're one. So, and to me, this is like that's the shadow work side. That's our animal side. That's to be in touch with that. It's to be integrated. So I think being an introvert is ridiculous, and I think being an extrovert is ridiculous in the same way that being a Democrat or Republican, they're all ridiculous. They're all ridiculous. There's truth in pieces of them if you're wise enough to listen to both of them. So
Again,
it's
it's the idea of balance, right?
yeah,
The
it's
idea of
it's
balance
which
again.
is more important, the left wing or the right wing on a bird?
Yeah,
It's
right.
really
Both.
it's that's exactly. But the left wing says the right wing is ridiculous, and that's literally how is it going to fly? It can't fly if both sides are saying that, and it's the same way. Oh, I'm not an introverted person. You mean you don't have roots? You don't mean you don't have introspection? Uh, you get your like, and it's a label. It's like you give me a room full of introverted people, I'll show you extroverted people. You know what I mean?
Right.
If you have introverted people around each other, they're going to speak. Because they're comfortable around the people they're around. And extroverted people, they will be intimidated by introverted people. There's
Yeah.
not going to be so, but that's the gap that's actually necessary, I think, in our culture. So, it's that's where I think that's where the power is. It's to integrate both of them, because one and of themselves, it's not enough.
Well, even if you take a look at our brain, isn't like the left side of our brain is kind of the analytical
Yeah.
thinking side, which would more relatable to an introvert, and then maybe the right side of the brain, more the extroverted, kind of creative side,
Yeah. And I
heartfelt
think that's
side,
a yin
maybe.
and a yang too. It can be
Yeah.
used for that. Like the the mathematic engineering side is the left side, and the right side is the, creating, the artist in all of us. And when those are integrated, I think that's in each individual. Um, because there's a divide, right? There's a divide in all of us, the thinking brain versus the feeling brain. And when those are integrated, you're indivisible in yourself. And that's it's what's I think what our country has forgotten to some extent. Our national anthem says, "One nation, indivisible." That word indivisible. Well, when we're divided in ourselves, we will be divided collectively. When we're not divided in ourselves, we're not associated with the left wing or the right wing. We're not associated with who's better, men or women. We're not picking sides, although sometimes it's expressed in picking a side, but there's context and roots behind it. Then you have a society you're undivided society. There's nothing that can divide people. You embrace conflict. Oh, like the idea of saying I don't want to talk about politics is ridiculous. What people are saying when they don't like, you want to talk about language and communication. I think politics and religion are the most important thing to talk about. But we have a society. You go out on a date. I got to think of stuff to come up with and talk about. You talk about shit, and then the other, you like, and then you have a relationship, and then those things, your religion, your core belief system. That's what I think religion is. I think everyone's religious, even if you say you're atheist. Religion means to come together, to bind together, to come to. So you say you're not religious, you're saying you don't want to come together. That's literally what you're saying. It's the definition of the word, right? Whereas I think atheists are ones that have just rejected the institutions, which I would actually agree with. I would agree with the. Um, it's like saying I don't like school. You can still not like school, but love education. Everybody loves education. Everybody loves to learn. You're
Right.
lying if you say that. So, but this is again, this is language. This is diving into it, getting the roots of the problem. Uh, and it's so simple. But the religion and politics are literally, that's the way you're going to live your life. So you can be I think you can really be. We need intelligent politics. We need to understand like our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, understand like, people die for that. And then at the same time, as far as religion goes, religion it's what binds us. It's your belief system. It's what's the framework for how you live your life. If you don't like the word religion, what's your framework for how you live?
Well, again, it's people that have a difficult time in sharing their views because they feel that they're going to wind up in a conflict, going to hold back. This
Yeah, afraid of
again.
conflict. It's right, goes back into what you were saying.
Yeah. So being able to speak up for yourself uh, should not prevent two people from sharing on any topic.
And
Right? There's respect.
your example of the three-step, not to cut you off, I'm on fire now. The three-step process that you talk about, that actually ties into religion, whether you realize it or not. Hate the sin, not the sinner. So when you're focusing on how you feel and you're focusing on how the problem that you're having and you're making a request, you're not putting the other person down. You're making a request. You're hating the problem. You're hating the idea that is being held rather than the person. Because the
Yeah.
second you attack the person, it's like you did this. Now it's going to come right back to you.
Yeah, and you're not taking responsibility for how your request is going to be taken. That's their responsibility. You don't have to take that on. That's, I think, an important point too. We are responsible for ourselves. We don't necessarily have to take responsibility for how somebody else feels. That's for them to handle. Again, that's why you have two whole people. Two whole people will take their own responsibility and not place it on the other person.
Yeah.
So,
And
good
100%.
stuff.
And I just saw a quote today. I wanted to share it before we end, because it's a struggle I've had in my life. I'll read the quote and I'll break down what I mean. A man who believes nothing will stand for nothing, and over time he will eventually become nothing. So in our culture, I've noticed that I just brought up framework and religion. If you don't have a framework for how you see it, if you don't have a belief, and it doesn't mean that I've grown up like it's this wishy-washy world. Anything goes. So you can just do whatever you want. You only live once mentality. And there's a piece of that that's true. But if you live there, I have no ideas of my own. I don't believe anything because I don't want to have conflict again, right? Versus this is my foundation. I believe this and I will die for these beliefs, because I think that's very powerful too. For me, when I was very depressed, one of the reasons I think at the core of why I was depressed, you really think about it, if you don't have something that you would die for, whether it be a person, whether you be a family, it's something higher than yourself, you really don't have a reason to live. At least that's my philosophy. If you wouldn't die for, and when you find something you would be willing to die for that binds people together, for example, the freedom to articulate yourself, the freedom to whatever it is, the freedom to do whatever you want in life, so long as you're not hurting other people, the real core principles of this country, that's worth dying for, right? But if you don't have anything you die for, you actually, goes back to your point of being passive aggressive. You don't have
a reason to live.
Yeah. It's like I say the cells in your body, right? You think they're sitting there, each individual cell saying, I got to look out for myself. No, there's cells in your body dying every day to fight off. They're not selfish. If your cells were selfish, we call that cancer. So it's being in that, we're cells in the same way we're cells in a body, we're humans on a planet. But we're so consumed with protecting ourselves and not being afraid to die. And I'm not saying go out and say, I'm going to, I've had that piece where it's like, I'm going to save the world. And it's not seeking the path of being martyr, but it's more of, this is my line. And the word yes is as beautiful as the word no. Both very powerful. This is my yes, and this is my no. When you push and Jordan Peterson talks about this, if you don't have a consequence, people will run all over you. If you say no right here, you won't speak to me this way, and this is why. Or, using your example of the assertive approach, I'd appreciate you don't speak to me this way. It also has to be backed up by, there will be a consequence for it. And the consequence doesn't mean that you're threatening somebody. The consequence, that is, if you continue to do what you do, something that you don't want to happen will happen. And what that is, it will be expressed differently. It might be you have to cut off the relationship. If you're giving money to someone, cutting off the money. If you're doing something for other people, you don't do that thing for them anymore because they're not respecting your request. But if you have nothing to back it up, people will run all over you. If there's it's like a mafia movie, right? You got my money? No, I'll pay you next week. Oh, really? You're going to pay me next week? There's an experience of pain, right? You're not going to borrow money and say you have to stick to your word. So.
Yeah, I think we
it's a good place to end
covered
there.
we covered it pretty well.
And on a final note, I have a nutrition fact for you. You ready?
Okay. Yeah.
If you drink a gallon of water per day, you won't have time for other people's bullshit because you'll be too busy peeing, staying hydrated.
There you go.
So make sure you drink a gallon of water.
Yeah, it'll be right. You'll be mindless. Very good.
All right. Looking forward to the third conversation. We'll dive into more stuff.
Yeah, very good. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for being here.
All right. Take care. Be well.